wife and I were married for 8 years. Throughout our entire relationship, we had a third wheel, so to speak. I had never thought of Mike in that way before, but recently, everything changed for the three of us. We have been best friends since a young age, and grew up together in our town. All three of us even worked our first job together. When I realized my wife's feelings for me were more than just friendship, I confided in our third wheel, my best friend Mike. We were in our 20s at the time, and my wife and I hadn't even started dating yet. Mike was incredibly supportive and assured me that he did not see her in a romantic light, so there was no competition or issue between us. After we got married, Mike became our handyman. I was never skilled with tools, but I made good money as an accountant for a large company. We bought our own house in our mid-20s, and I believed our relationship was everything it needed to be. I even made home videos showcasing our life together and proudly introduced my sleepy, grumpy wife as the love of my life. However, after 5 years of marriage, something seemed to be bothering her. Despite my efforts to talk through any issues, she never opened up to me about anything significant that needed to change. Instead, she would just correct me on small things she thought I could do better. She also frequently gave Mike a list of things to check or fix around the house. Meanwhile, Mike was about to get engaged. I met his fiancée, and she seemed nice enough, but I didn't know her as well as Mike knew my wife. Mike was always at our house, even when his fiancée wasn't there. He would fix things for us while I was at work, or just come over for a social visit when I was home. I never told him about the tension I was feeling with my wife. I was embarrassed, and thought I could fix it on my own. Despite my efforts to improve, such as doing the dishes, driving, laundry, and cleaning, my wife would still look at me with resentment. When I found myself hesitating to even look in her direction, I knew something had to change. She started leaving the house every day, about 15 minutes after I got home from work. At first, she would say she forgot something at the store or needed to see her mom, but after a few days, she stopped telling me where she was going. I got used to her leaving and didn't care that I didn't know where she was going. It was a relief to have some time where I didn't have to worry about her disapproving gaze. One afternoon, after she left, I decided to snoop around in our bedroom. I was cleaning while I did it, so she couldn't get mad at me for moving things around. While looking under the bed, I found another cell phone. It wasn't old, and it was still turned on. There was no passcode, so it unlocked with a simple swipe of my finger. There was only one chain of messages on the phone, and it didn't take me long to realize they were between my wife and Mike. My best friend was secretly texting my wife on this phone. My phone, and the messages were exactly what you would expect to find if my wife and best friend could fully express their love without worry. I was devastated, my heart was racing, and it was hard to believe she was doing this to me. Not only that, but Mike was heartless enough to cheat on his soon-to-be wife, Julie, with his best friend's wife. Even though my wife had been looking at me with scorn, I never thought she would start an affair with my best friend. There were messages about their sexual encounters, all the times they met up, and how bad it would be if either I or Julie found out what they were doing. I found out their affair began even before Mike met Julie. He was basically marrying her as a bonus to the relationship he valued the most, the one he had to keep secret. My wife actually said I wouldn't have the nerve to leave her, even if I discovered their affair. She said if I found out, she would still have to be the one to divorce me, and if I tried to weasel out of alimony payments, she could just ask one of her friends to lie about me cheating with her. Patient's anger replaced my grief. I took screenshots of everything and sent them to my phone and email address. I didn't want her to know I found the phone because I planned on exposing them before Mike's wedding, if neither of them came clean before that. She came home with rosy cheeks and a shy smile. She greeted me warmly, but it was like I could finally see that she was just putting on a show. I felt foolish for failing to notice it before, but she was an excellent actress, and I never thought she would be willing to put on a permanent act for her husband, the man she shared her life and home with. How could anyone with a sound mind put on an act where they should feel the most safe and natural? Why would she just divorce me and honestly admit she no longer wanted to be married? I knew it wasn't anything I could have helped because I tried talking to her. I wanted to know whatever it was that was bothering her, even if it was about me. She kept our evening together short and went to bed like everything was right with the world. I wanted it so badly to wake her up and hear what excuses she would give me for what I found. Mike was about to get married. That made it so hard to believe this was happening between them. Why did either of them feel like it was acceptable to engage in this behavior? For the next 8 days leading up to my best friend's wedding, I asked myself these questions and more. I finally confided in my mother-in-law the day before the wedding about what was going on. She advised me to keep my mouth shut because they were adults and I would risk looking foolish if I came forward with the evidence. She was only concerned about how much money the bride's family had spent on the upcoming wedding and the judgment my wife would face for my accusations. But it wasn't just accusations. I had proof. She and Mike were truly involved in this affair, and I felt like the best and only decision for me was to expose the truth to everyone. So the next morning, during the wedding setup, I prepared the screenshots I had taken to display on the projector during their vows. I was supposed to be Mike's best man, even though he was sleeping with my wife. I hated everything I laid eyes on. It felt like I took the red pill and learned the truth about my reality. As my best friend stood at the altar with Julie, my wife and I sat watching them in the crowd of wedding guests. Suddenly, the first screenshot popped up. After everyone got a chance to read it, there was a collective gasp. That's when Julie and Mike looked up. Then the slide changed, showing two images cropped side by side. FCE, homages Mike and my wife sent to each other. One was of his package, and the other was of my wife, in Linguri looking very welcoming for whoever was meant to receive the image. People were screaming and getting up to leave before the third slide came. It was two long messages, one from Mike describing the things he wanted to do to my wife, calling her by name, and a response from her in kind. Julie was silently sobbing, staring at Mike. She ran back down the aisle dramatically, and Mike looked straight at me. His eyes immediately dropped, and he sat down in the fetal position. I can only imagine how he felt at this moment. Maybe he felt as bad as I did. My wife got up to leave, but she was stopped by some guests and the bride and groom's parents. All but two people were talking, crying, or yelling. The two silent ones were my wife and Mike. They didn't have anything to say to the angry, hurt people surrounding them. I think they were in shock, but also knew that no matter what they said, it wouldn't matter. People left as soon as they came to accept that the wedding was off, and they weren't going to get any answers from the cheaters. Mike approached me and my wife. I was still there, simply because I wanted to see if either of them would apologize to me. Mike told my wife that he didn't want to see her anymore. He said more, but as soon as he said he didn't want to see her anymore, my wife finally cracked. She sobbed and wailed. Mike turned to me and apologized for ruining my life. He left, and I left my wife at the church. She tried to come with me, but I told her to get her own ride. She didn't have her own car, so her mother had to pick her up from the church. Her and Mike dropped off the face of the earth, completely shunned by their friends and families, except for my ex-mother-in-law. She let her daughter live with her, but she didn't hesitate to express her disappointment. After I decided to tell the truth, it was like she realized how bad it was. She messaged me on Facebook, sometimes to tell me how I dodged a bullet divorcing my wife when I did, because she only became more disappointing. Thanks to my evidence, the divorce went extremely well for me. My ex was ordered to pay me alimony, and the judge called her despicable. I am so sorry your wife started an affair with your best friend. It's even worse because your best friend did this too. They lived a lie and didn't care. They only worried about getting caught because they would be inconvenienced. Your wife even told Mike how low she was willing to go, making up disastrous lies in the event of a divorce. It's a lucky thing you found this phone. Thankfully, you didn't have to live through the terrible fate your wife planned for you. I don't believe they deserved any less than the confrontation you gave them. They ruined several lives by starting and hiding their relationship. You have a wonderful opportunity to start over new and practice the knowledge you've acquired. Thank you for sharing this story. Let's now get into our second story for today. My wife and I were married for 13 years. In the 8th year of our marriage, my brother was sentenced to 5 years in prison. At this point in our lives, my wife and I both worked full-time, but it just so happened that she was off during visiting hours at the prison. I asked her to start visiting him for me once a week. She could video call me while she was there, so I could see him, but it was hard for him to hear anything I said. I wrote him letters that she would bring. I was able to get off work a few times to visit him, but it wasn't more than 5 times in 5 years. I felt bad, but my wife and I had an expensive mortgage, debt, and bills to pay. I also felt like it wouldn't make much of a difference if I visited him in person or sent my wife to visit on my behalf. She paid him a visit once a week until the day he got out. My wife started talking about him more as his release date approached. She was really concerned about him having a place to move into and asked several times if he could move in with us. I didn't feel comfortable with that. I knew that after 5 years in prison, My brother was going to need room to spread his wings and enjoy the company of a woman. Since I was financially stable, I got him an apartment nearby. My wife started going to his place whenever she had the chance to bring him food or help keep his house clean. It was around this time that I started to realize she was acting more like a wife to him. I had planned on talking to her about it, but my brother beat me to it. One day, while she was at work, he came over and told me that I was working too much and not showing enough love to my wife. I asked him what he meant and why he was saying this. He said that he had gotten to know her quite well over the past 5 years, and she had confided in him that she wished I worked less. I asked why she didn't feel like she could talk to me about it, and my brother just shrugged. He also suggested that it might be my fault that she was so attached to him. I didn't like him saying that. I didn't know how to respond. I knew he was hinting at the fact that I had sent my wife to visit him in prison instead of going myself. After this conversation, my wife continued to visit him at his apartment while I was at work. She never told me about these visits. When I asked her to stop going over there, she didn't even flinch. She continued to visit him until my brother finally admitted to it. I forbade her from going over there anymore, but it didn't make a difference. I still had to work, so she still got to see him. Whenever I was home, there was a lot of tension in the house. The tension was palpable. We both knew she was betraying me by continuing to visit my brother. We both knew I suspected them of sleeping with each other, but neither of them would admit to something like that. The air was thick with silence. One day, I decided to surprise my wife. I convinced myself that she wasn't cheating on me because they couldn't do that to me. They loved and cared about me. Starting an affair should have been impossible due to the genuine concern for me that I thought they had. I loved my wife, so I bought her roses and her favorite chocolate on the way home. I entered the front door quietly and snuck up behind her as she stood at the kitchen table. She was holding her phone, looking through pictures of her and my brother. She stopped to stare at the picture of them kissing. In shock, I gasped. She turned around, so I slapped her with the roses. I told her to get out and started frantically scooping her clothes out of the dressers and into trash bags. She was just crying as she packed her essentials and the bags I gave her into her car and left. I sold the rest of her things, including her collection of expensive purses. Of course, she went to live with my brother, and I found out they were in a sexual relationship since the day he got out of prison. For 3 months, my wife thought she was doing the right thing. She thought she could live happily ever after with my brother, after our divorce was final. Not even a week after that, my brother was arrested and taken back to jail. He's facing another felony charge. My ex lost her mind. She couldn't stay in his apartment without him, so she started begging me for forgiveness. She said she knew she messed up, but this was just something that happened sometimes. It was no more than an unavoidable accident, and she swore that now that this happened to her, she would never let it happen again. Around the same time, my brother was begging me from behind bars for money or a lawyer. I knew both of them were only out for themselves. I knew that if I kept entertaining them, they would only ever take advantage and hurt. So for the foreseeable future, I decided to cut them both out of my life. It was extremely difficult because I was left without any relationship to compare to the ones I lost. But I didn't lose them because of anything I did. I lost them because they weren't worth having. I did everything I could to involve myself in social events and family gatherings, even though I felt like isolating myself. It paid off because on the days when I couldn't bring myself to leave the house, I had people out there waiting for me. They reached out, and when I didn't respond, they'd pay me a visit in person. Sometimes that was exactly what I needed. I met a guy that I'm happy to call my best friend. It might sound cliché, but I'm glad I survived this double betrayal. I didn't give up on life or quit my job, even though I heavily considered it. What happened to you is devastating. I am so sorry that your wife started an affair with your brother, but it didn't matter that she was the one visiting him in prison. You trusted each of them, and they still went behind your back. You cared about your brother enough to send the love of your life to check on him and make sure he didn't feel alone or forgotten. I'm glad you refused to blame yourself for this. Neither of them behaved like your brother or wife, and you deserve better. I'm glad you found out the truth, even though it was devastating. You meant to find out the truth, and at least you did before your brother went back to prison. Your wife might have just gone back to being your wife until she found someone else to start an affair with. You've done well by surrounding yourself with others and refusing to give up. I wish you all the best. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Take care.